one of the largest companies in modern dating, ended 2025 with approximately $3.5 billion in revenue. At the same time, the number of paying users across the platform fell by only 5%. That tension worth paying attention to. Modern dating remains culturally powerful and commercially valuable, but is it actually bringing us closer to love, or has it simply become better at keeping us inside the possibility? Inside the search. Welcome to my podcast. I'm Lara Varlamova, a narrative strategist. My background sits at the intersection of literature, language, and marketing. I study how stories shape meaning and how meaning builds authority and ultimately a higher valuation. You're watching the series exploring psychology behind modern attention systems. We have already looked into true crime and horror because both have moved beyond the stories themselves. Through internet-native formats, their emotional mechanics now keep us more engaged than ever. And today, we're diving into romance. Before dating became a market, romance had already spent centuries shaping our expectations of attraction, separation, uncertainty, and reunion. But how did the central question of ancient romance, will love survive the distance, the danger, and the long road back to one another, transform into a much more modern question? Will I be chosen? Let's dive in. To understand why this question feels so significant now, we need to look beyond the technology and return to the story that dating has always promised to fulfill: romance. The earliest surviving complete Greek romance, Callirhoe, was written almost 2,000 years ago. But it had the same structure that would still feel familiar today. Two people fall in love, circumstances pull them apart, certainty tests their connection, and the story carries them towards reunion. The setting and obstacles have changed across centuries, but the central promise has remained remarkably stable. Romance gives longing a destination. But classical romance is the journey between feeling and the choice. Ancient romance did not always make its lovers wait to understand how they felt. In many of its earliest stories, love arrived immediately. In Callirhoe, the heroes fell in love at first sight and marry almost at once. The feeling is not the unresolved part of the story. What remains unresolved is whether that feeling can survive everything that follows. Love at first sight reveals desire, but it cannot yet tell us what that desire will become when it encounters jealousy, separation, danger, obligations, and the possibility of permanent loss. The journey places the feeling under the pressure. It creates the emotional space between desire and certainty. We remain inside that space because the story has made a promise. Eventually, the uncertainty will acquire meaning. Psychologically, this is what gives the eventual choice a weight. The characters are not simply repeating an emotion they felt at the beginning. They're carrying it through consequences. Romance holds us by taking an immediate feeling and questioning whether it can become an enduring choice. Will love survive the distance, the danger, and the long road back to one another? Romeo and Juliet does not give us a happy ending, but it gives us an absolute choice. They choose each other against the structures surrounding them, and the tragedy comes from the world that cannot accommodate that choice. The ending is devastating, but it is not emotionally vogue. The story closes the question by showing us whom they chose and the full cost of that answer. In Pride and Prejudice, the obstacle is different. Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy must move through false impressions, wounded pride, social position, and their inability to understand one another clearly. Darcy desires Elizabeth before he had truly learned to recognize her. His first proposal is a choice, yes, but it is not yet the kind of choice romance promises. It is still shaped by his belief that loving her requires him to overlook everything he considers socially beneath him. Elizabeth rejects him because being selected is not the same thing as being understood. They both had to reconsider their assumptions, and only after that they could meet again and differently. They cannot fully choose each other until they learn to see each other clearly. This is the important part of their romantic architecture. To be chosen is not only to be desired, it is to be recognized. The deeper romantic fantasy is not simply that someone sees us and feels desire. It is that they continue looking long enough to recognize the person beneath the performance, the social role, and behavior we use for protection, and then choose that person knowingly. Romance gives that desire to be chosen a journey. The first feeling may arrive in an instant, but feeling alone is not enough. It has traveled through misunderstanding, distance, fear, and the possibility of loss. It must survive the world outside the lovers and the uncertainty within them. This is where feeling begins to mature. The characters come to understanding not only that they want one another, but what choosing one another will require. Romance keeps moving towards the moment when private feeling can no longer remain private. It must become visible through a confession, a return, or a sacrifice, or a simple courage to stay with that person. That moment carries weight because the choice has been tested. It is no longer an excitement of the first sight. It is the decision made after love has met reality. This is also what makes romance different from other genres we have explored. True crime may reach the verdict, but it often leaves deeper questions about motives, responsibility, and justice unresolved. Horror may defeat an immediate threat, but it often leaves us with a sense that the danger has not completely disappeared. Romance is the only genre that moves through resolution. It is built around an emotional question that cannot remain open forever. It may prolong uncertainty, but its structure keeps moving towards an answer. The lovers unite, separate, or lose each other, yet relationship is finally defined. Even when the ending is tragic, the central emotional question is answered. We know who was chosen, what that choice meant, and what it cost. That is a classical promise of romance. Longing may be complicated, delayed, or destroyed, but it is not meant to drift endlessly between the possibilities. And the question the story carries from beginning to end is this: will love survive the distance, the danger, and the long road back to one another? When romance moved to the screen, it did not acquire a completely new central question. The question was already there. Will private feeling become a real choice? But the screen changed how that question could be expressed. A novel could take us directly inside someone's thoughts. It could explain why a character was afraid, what they misunderstood, or why they returned. Cinema had to make those thoughts visible, so romance moved into the body. A pause before answering, the distance between the two people in the room, a hand that almost reaches another hand, a character living and then turning back, a close-up, head slightly longer than expected. Cinema discovered that emotional suspense could exist inside a look. This is not only a cinematic conversation. Research into visual emotion suggests that a larger, closer images of faces are processed more quickly and their expressions are experienced as more emotionally intense. The close-up gives the audience more access to small changes in expressions, allowing us to interpret feelings the characters may still be unable to say. Early romantic comedies began building the entire stories around the movement from hidden feeling to visible choice. In It Happened One Night, released in 1934, a runway heiress and a struggling reporter are pushed into proximity by circumstances. They argue, resist one another, and appear socially incompatible. But the journey gradually changes the meaning to the interactions. Irritation becomes familiarity, and familiarity becomes recognition. The film helped establish many of the structures that Wilde later will define as romantic comedy: forced proximity, clashing personalities, and the pleasure of watching two people understanding their feelings before they're ready to admit them. The audience often recognizes the relationship before the characters do. That gap becomes the source of suspense. We're not waiting to discover whether there's an attraction. We're waiting to see whether attraction will become a decision. Rome and Holiday showed the romantic resolution does not always mean staying together. Princess Anne returns to her public duty while Joe gives up the story that could have advanced his career. At the final press conference, they cannot speak publicly about what happened between them, but their choices reveal that their relationship was real. Psychologically, sacrifice becomes proof of emotional seriousness. Joe protects Anne rather than uses her, and Anne accepts that love does not remove the life she's responsible for. The romance ends, but the meaning is resolved. By the time of When Harry Met Sally in 1989, romantic cinema had become highly skilled at stretching the distance between recognition and commitment. Harry and Sally meet, separate, reconnect, and spend years of building a relationship whose meaning remains unsettled. The film does not depend, or the story does not depend on whether they are compatible. Their compatibility becomes increasingly obvious. It depends on how long they can avoid interpreting it as love. Psychologically, uncertainty is effective because it keeps the unresolved person mentally present. In one study, participants who were uncertain about whether someone liked them reported thinking about that person more and experiencing stronger attraction than participants who have received a definite answer. Uncertainty does not simply delay resolution. It can intensify attention to the relationship itself. That is why the final confession in a romantic comedy carries so much weight. It ends the uncertainty. The character is no longer analyzing signals, interpreting possibilities, imagining or projecting themselves from rejection. Private feeling becomes visible choice. Pretty Woman, released the following year, makes the movement especially clear. The relationship begins at the commercial arrangement. Its meaning appears to have been agreed in advance. Both characters understand the boundaries of their exchange and the roles they're supposed to play, but the emotional movement on the film gradually destabilizes those roles. The fantasy is not simply that a wealthy man falls in love with a beautiful woman. It is that someone who has been socially reduced to a function is eventually recognized as a complete person. The ending matters because it makes the choice visible. The relationship moves from temporary exchange towards recognition. Psychologically, recognition carries such power because our sense of worth is partially shaped by whether we believe other people value and accept us. So-called social meta theory suggests that self-esteem partially reflects how valued we feel by others. When the person we want chooses us, it can confirm that we matter beyond attractiveness. Cinema made that choice visible. Television changed how long we could wait for it. A film might delay the confession or the kiss by 2 hours. Television could delay it for several seasons. This created long-running romantic storylines in which audience waits to see whether the two characters will finally choose each other. In Friends, Ross and Rachel's relationship could move through attractions, commitment, separations, jealousy, other partners, and renewed possibility. the romantic storyline no longer had to develop continuously. It could pause while other stories took over, then return several episodes later. Over time, the audience built a history with the characters. A small interaction in later seasons could carry the weight of everything that had happened before. The missed chances, the separations, and the choices they still hadn't made. We were not reacting only to the scene, we were reacting to the entire relationship we had watched develop over time. Psychology helps explain this attachment. The more often we encounter someone, even the fictional character, the more familiar they become. Familiarity can increase liking, and repeated exposure can make viewers feel emotionally connected to characters. Television made romantic suspense accumulate. Each new moment carried the emotional weight, and all the moments that came before it. The audience did not simply witness the possibility of the relationship, they lived beside it. Over time, the romantic question also became more psychologically complex. The question was no longer only whether the two people would admit that they were in love, but it became whether they could build a life together without giving up on the parts of themselves and the relationships around them that already shaped who they were. In one day, Emma and Dexter remained connected for years, but timing, ambition, class and emotional immaturity repeatedly pull them apart. Their feelings are never the only issue. The question is whether they can become the people capable of choosing each other at the same time. In Bridgerton, attraction is never entirely private because courtship takes place inside a visible social system. It also places modern romantic questions inside a historic setting, asking not only whom they are expected to marry, but whether they can choose to love and protect their independence, and also be accepted as they are. Relationship psychology suggests that love can change how we see ourselves and the life we imagine. Another person can bring new experiences, values, and possibilities into our world. But that can also create a tension. Choosing someone may mean changing parts of the life, identity, or future we already know. So the obstacle in modern screen romance is rarely just whether two people can be together. It is whether they are ready to become the people the relationship requires. Reality television then turned this into a format. The Bachelor, which began in 2002, organized the entire program around one person choosing from multiple romantic possibilities. The rose ceremony gave the private anxiety a romance a visible object. Receiving the rose meant remaining inside the possibility of love. Not receiving it meant rejection, departure, and disappearance from the story. The romantic decision was no longer only the ending. It became the mechanism that organized every episode. Love Island, which launched in its current form in 2015, made the choice recurring. Participants didn't need to be chosen only once. They had to remain desirable through new arrivals, challenging alliances, and repeated recouplings. The format continually restored the same insecurity. Who will choose me now that another option has entered? Will that person who selected me yesterday select me again? Was I chosen because I was genuinely wanted, or because I was the safest available route through the program? Since its 2015 launch, Love Island has built its structure around recouplings, unexpected arrivals, and the possibility of being removed from the villa when the romantic connection falls. This is psychologically powerful because rejection is not experienced as a neutral loss of opportunity. Research on social pain shows that exclusions and rejections engage some of the same neutral systems involved in physical distress. A public romantic rejection, therefore, touches something deeper than disappointment. It threatens belonging and relational value in front of a group. Love is Blind, launched in 2020, pushed the question further to try and remove appearance from the initial choice. Its premise is explicit. Can someone be chosen for who they are before they are seen? But once the couples leave the pods, the social world returns. Bodies return, families return, status, lifestyle, physical attraction, and the opinions of other people return. The format begins by separating emotional connection from appearance, then watches to see whether the choice can survive once the rest of the reality is restored. Across these programs, romance becomes partly emotional and partly investigative. We watch the feelings, but we also search for evidence that the feelings are real. Is someone choosing a person or choosing the safest route through the show? Is the declaration genuine, or has the participant learned what kind of declaration the format rewards? Will the relationship survive once the cameras, competition, and public attention disappears? Modern audiences are highly aware that the camera changes behavior. We understand that the participants may gain followers, visibility, opportunities, and personal brands from appearing in the relationship program. That awareness changes the burden of proof. Being chosen is no longer enough. The choice must also appear authentic. When a program pushes someone to confess their feelings or purpose, the audience may question whether the moment is genuine or simply required by the format. That is why a small, unplanned interaction can feel more believable than the dramatic declaration. A quiet look, an act of care, or a private conversation may seem more truthful because there's no obvious reward for performing it. The audience becomes an investigator of authenticity. And this is the larger journey romance has taken on the screen. Cinema made private feeling visible. Television made romantic uncertainty last longer and accumulate meaning. Reality television made selection procedural, public, and repeatable. The underlying anxiety was always there. Another person is free to choose, and they may not choose me. But once it became a format, something important changed. In classical romance, the choice creates resolution. The uncertainty ends, private feeling becomes visible, and the story can close. In public dating formats, the choice is designed to delay resolution rather than deliver it. It has to be questioned, tested, or repeated because the uncertainty is what keeps the show moving. Someone is chosen, but another option arrives. A couple forms, but recoupling is announced. So while the classical romance asks whether love can survive, public dating formats shift the question towards the individual. Will I be chosen? The internet didn't replace the structure of romance. It changed what happens to that structure once the story is no longer contained inside fiction. A fictional romance is completed before we see it. The writer already knows where the relationship is going, even when the audience does not. Internet-native romance often develops in public, without that certainty. A creator introduces a partner. The relationship gradually appears through photograph, videos, or casual references. The audience notices who is present in the background, how the couple speaks to each other, whether something in their dynamic appears to have changed. The relationship becomes serialized while it is still being lived. There may be a sort of launch, a public confirmation, a period of shaped visibility, and eventually a breakup explanation. But between those moments, the audience is left to interpret fragments. Psychologically, this is partly explained by parasocial attachment. Audiences form one-sided emotional relationship with people they repeatedly encounter through media. Once viewers feel familiar with the creator's relationship can begin to feel like part of a shared social world. Even though The audience has not real access to it. That sense of proximity encourages people to notice changes, search for expectations, and complete the part of the story they cannot see. This is where the classical romantic mechanism meets the modern media attention systems. Romance has always depended on resolution. Internet gives it more ground for uncertainty. Podcasts intensify these effects because voice creates social presence. We hear hesitation, contradiction, and the emotional logic someone uses to explain what happened. Personal disclosure and conversational delivery can strengthen the listener's sense of intimacy with the speaker, even when the conversation has been carefully produced. The romantic question, therefore, becomes a reason to reflect. It is no longer, will these two people end up together? It becomes, why did I choose this person? Why did they not choose me? And what does that experience reveal about who am I? Dating apps take the same uncertainty and organize it through the interface experience. A profile becomes an introduction. The swipe becomes an initial decision. And the match creates recognition. The message suggests that a story may begin, but at every stage can also become another unfinished beginning. A match may never become a conversation may never become a meeting may never become a relationship. An almost relationship can remain emotionally significant without ever acquiring a clear name. And then the interface is designed to multiply beginnings. Resolution requires two people to move beyond the interface and make a choice. That choice is difficult because choosing one person also means giving up the search through everyone else who might still be available. Research into online dating helps explain why abundance does not automatically make choosing easier. Large numbers of profiles can create the choice overload and gradually place users in an evaluative mindset, where they become more likely to reject possibilities than explore them. Other studies have found that when people perceive many alternatives partners to be available, they report feeling less ready to enter a committed relationship. This does not mean dating apps cannot create meaningful relationship. They clearly can, but they allow people to meet who might never have encountered each other otherwise. The tension is structural. For someone looking for a lasting relationship, success may mean no longer needing the product. For the platform built around repeat participation, continued activity has commercial value. The person may be searching for a reason to leave. The platform continues providing reasons to return. This can make activity feel like progress even when intimacy is not deepened. Swiping, matching, and messaging create movements, but that movement is not the same as movement towards another person. Classical romance often built its tension around two people wanted each other but couldn't overcome distance, family, class, timing, or fear. The modern obstacle may be abundance. People can reach more potential partners than ever, but the visibility of alternatives can make it harder to decide where to remain. At the same time, the person being chosen has changed. The classical romantic hero was often organized around a relatively clear social question. Whom could she marry, and what would the marriage mean for the position in the world? The modern hero may already be managing work, motherhood, family history, ambition, and a public identity before romantic resolution is even possible. Margot's got money trouble belongs in these conversations organically because romance cannot organize Margot's entire life. She is the new mother facing financial pressure while trying to build a future and decide how much of herself she's prepared to make visible. Her need is not simply to be rescued by love. It is to build a life in which intimacy, work, survival, and identity can coexist. Psychological research into multiple identities makes this distinction important. Holding several identities can strengthen well-being when those identities support each other. But when motherhood, work, and personal identities are experienced as incomplete, that conflict reduces well-being and makes stress in one area spread into the others. Contemporary romance, therefore, becomes less about rescue and more about integration. Can someone enter a complicated life without demanding that it become smaller? Can a woman be chosen without being simplified? Can intimacy support the person she has become rather than compete with the rest of her identity? This makes the final choice more demanding, but also more meaningful. The person must be seen within the full reality of her life or his life. And this brings us back to why resolution matters. Modern media is exceptionally good at keeping emotional loops open. A relationship can disappear without explanation. A breakup can produce several competing accounts. A dating format can resolve one choice while immediately introducing another season, another couple, or another possibility. The mind continues returning to unresolved stories because the central question remains active. Research into narrative closure suggests that a story feels complete not simply when it stops, but when its important questions have been answered and events can be understood as a coherent whole. Romantic resolution doesn't have to mean a wedding or a happy ending. The relationship may become possible or it may become impossible. The characters may choose each other or understand why they cannot. What matters is that feeling eventually produces a consequence. Classical romance uses delay to allow attraction to mature into recognition and recognition to acquire enough weight for a choice. The obstacle is not there only to keep the audience watching. It tests whether the feeling can survive reality. The central question of classical romance was, will love survive? Modern romance increasingly asks, will I be chosen? But digital systems cannot turn the second question into a mechanism for preventing resolutions. The possibility of being chosen keeps people participating, while continued presence of alternatives delays the moment when choosing must become final. Classical romance used uncertainty to give choice its weight. Modern attention systems can use uncertainty to stop the choice from setting. That may be why romance remains psychologically necessary. We live inside systems that encourage us to keep our options open. There's always another profile, another explanation, another interpretation, and another possible person. Romance moves in the opposite direction. It tells us that meaning begins when possibility narrows. One person stops being part of the crowd, recognition becomes commitment, feeling becomes a decision, and that decision creates something an endless sequence of possibilities cannot. A before and after. Romance is sometimes dismissed as predictable because we believe we know where it is going. Two people meet, something separates them. The question becomes whether what they feel will survive long enough to bring them back to each other. But predictability is not the weakness of romance. It is the promise. Romance tells us that uncertainty doesn't have to continue forever. Attention can deepen into recognition, and recognition can mature into feeling. And feeling can finally carry enough weight to become a choice. Not every person will choose us. Not every relationship will survive. Not every story will end in happiness. Romance has always known this. That is why the genre can hold tragedy as easily as it holds reunion. But even the tragedies insist that the feeling was real, the choice carried weight, and the relationship changed the people inside it. Romance moves towards resolution because love cannot remain meaningful if it is kept permanently inside possibility. At some point, feeling must become visible through decisions and actions. Psychologically, this is what commitment gives us. The attachment system is not settled by attention alone. It looks for reliable availability, the knowledge that the other person is emotionally present, that the bond is secure. That is what modern romance increasingly places under pressure. In the culture of profiles, feeds, public performances, and endless alternatives, we can remain visible to one another without ever becoming secure to one another. And we can be noticed, desired, and followed while still being held at a level of possibility. Romance returns us to a more private hope that someone will see beyond the versions of us available for display and recognizes the person underneath. That they will stop looking for the next possibility, that they will choose, and that the choice will survive. This is romance as the architecture of being chosen. Not the fantasy that everyone will love us, but the deeper promise that to one person we may become more than another option. We may become the answer.